Well, as we seek the Lord's help, can we turn back in our Bibles to the passage that we read in the book of Esther in chapter 2. Esther chapter 2, we can read again at verse 17, at the bottom of the page, verse 17. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. He set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Just this week that has passed, the organizers of the Miss America Beauty Contest announced that in future the event will not be about beauty and physical appearance. It will be about character, achievements, and intelligence. They made this change so that participants will not be viewed as objects, but as people. There was no such concern in the Persian Empire in King Xerxes' day. Women were just objects to be used for the pleasure of the powerful. And that's what we see here in this, you can call it a Miss Persia contest that was set up to find a replacement queen for Queen Vashti, who had been banished by the king when she refused his degrading demands. This competition here is all about external beauty and appearance. And it is really indicative of this superficial nature of so much that characterized King Xerxes and the massive Persian Empire over which he ruled. It seemed, when you read it, that appearances were all that mattered. If you were here when we looked at chapter 1, there was this decadent display of the king's riches, meant to convince people that here was one powerful king. But as we looked into it, we saw that behind the facade, it was actually one pathetic king. And so we return to this story and to chapter 2 today, which begins with the king reminiscing about Vashti, very likely with a degree of regret. And his servants step in and they say, don't worry, King Xerxes, we'll sort it. We'll find a new queen. We'll get you a better model. And so the narrative continues with no mention of God whatsoever. But as we go through chapter 2, we get to the first hint as to why this story is actually in the Bible. Because in verse 5, 6, 7, we meet a couple of Jews, Mordecai and Esther. And whenever the Bible mentions Jews, the intention is not for us to think in ethnic terms, but to think of them as the people of God. So this is the first hint as to why this story is in the Bible. Two people who belong to Israel, who belong to God's people, they are there. And the way they're introduced immediately leads you to think, well, they're important. We're going to have to keep our eye on this pair as we go through this story. And that is true. That is the case. The two of them become the main characters as the story develops. They are at the center of God's plan. And this is what the book is about. God's plan to save his people, the Jews, from a plot to exterminate them. And this pair, Mordecai and Esther, will be central to that. And as we consider them today, though, the story presents us with a bit of a dilemma. Because their behavior is far from exemplary. The two of them, Mordecai and Esther, they get up to things that we really cannot approve of. And yet here there's this reminder for us, is there not, that God can and does use people who make mistakes, and yet he can still use them for his own glory. But the main lesson today, really, and probably throughout the book, the main lesson that we're being taught here, and try and remember this one, is that power doesn't always exist where it appears to. As we go through this story, we'll find that the power isn't really resident in the greatness of this empire, despite the way it is presented to us as supreme. So I want to look at it under three headings today. First of all, we'll consider supremacy. Supremacy. So what we see here is the empire flexes its muscles once more to find a better queen to replace Queen Vashti. Supremacy. But then in contrast to that, we'll look at fragility as we consider these two Jews who really appear weak in contrast to the supremacy of the empire. So we'll have supremacy, fragility, and then thirdly, vulnerability. Vulnerability, because just towards the end of this chapter, in that last section, we get a hint that this empire and its great leader are not actually untouchable. They're not as powerful and supreme as they would like us to believe. So these will be our three headings this morning: supremacy, fragility, and then vulnerability. So let's look at the first of these, supremacy. The chapter opens, as I mentioned, with the king, Xerxes, recalling how he banished Queen Vashti when she refused his drunken demands. You might remember, if you were here, that he wanted to parade her beauty before his mates at the end of a week-long drinking party. You know, very often people make decisions when they're under the influence of alcohol that they later live to regret. That's what happened here. Xerxes regrets his decision. In fact, to be honest, it wasn't his decision. He asked for advice. That's what we saw. He was a bit of a pathetic king. He comes across as really powerful, but whenever there's trouble, he needs to get advisors to help him. And now he regrets that decision. And there's a real irony here. We saw a lot of irony in chapter 1. There's an irony here as well. Here is the most powerful man on the planet. He could have any woman that he wanted, except his own wife, Vashti. Because the decree with which she was banished was one of these decrees of the Persian Empire that cannot be changed. He could have anyone he wanted, but Vashti. So there's regret. Eventually, there's regret. It took him a long time, actually, to get to this point, because chapter 1, we were told that all that happened there was in the 3rd year of his reign. In chapter 2, end of verse 16, we're told that this is the 7th year of his reign. So there's 4 years have gone by since he banished Vashti. And it's only now he's getting a bit down about it all. But in this empire, you weren't allowed to be down. In this empire, signs of weakness, they were not allowed. And so his advisors come up with a plan that they know will please the king. They say, we're going to recruit the most beautiful women in the empire. And you can choose your favorite, King Xerxes, to be queen. And we read in verse 4, no surprise, this advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. Of course, it would appeal to him. He was all about appearances. And this competition was all about appearances. Look at the description of the women. There's 3 qualifications given in verse 2. Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins. That's the 3 qualifications. Beautiful young virgins. In the previous chapter, when the advisors had told him to get rid of Vashti, they said, get a better queen. And the sense there was one that was more compliant, one that would do what the king asked for. But now it doesn't seem to be about character or integrity or such like at all. Now it's all about appearances. That's the kind of world we live in as well. It's all about appearances, external, physical attractiveness seems to be all important. And yet God's word reminds us that God takes a different view. Man looks on the outward appearance, the Bible says, but the Lord looks on the heart. The Lord looks on the heart. But we're seeing here the great supremacy of this empire. In chapter 1, we were told that there was 127 provinces. And now in chapter 2, we find that in these 127 provinces, the king's commissioners start to recruit the most beautiful women that they can find, and they bring them into the king's harem. And historians tell us that these women would have, more than likely, would have no choice in the matter. They would have no choice in the matter. If the empire said, you've got to come, you've got to come. This was not a competition that you chose to enter. This was a competition that you were chosen for. The empire was supreme. Resistance was futile. And once they're recruited, we then see the extravagant preparations they've got to undergo before they're allowed anywhere near the king. Look at verse 12. Verse 12 we read, before a girl's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the woman. 6 months with oil and myrrh, and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. Now I know that some women can take a while getting ready, but 12 months, it's extreme. But yet that's what this empire was about. It is all about indulgence and luxury and excess. 12 months of toning and pampering and beautifying. For what? For what? To be used and abused by the king. Look at verse 14. In the evening, she would go there, that's to the palace, with the king, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Shazgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. These young women, and they were young, remember, once they had their night with the king, they were consigned to the king's scrap heap. Yes, they would be cared for, well cared for, provided for in many ways, but they would never be allowed to leave. They would never be allowed to marry. They would never be able to have children. It was an awful situation. One commentator describes it as luxurious desolation. Luxurious desolation. If they could leave, they would be worse off because they wouldn't have the luxury. They wouldn't be looked after. And nobody would ever take them as wife because they belonged to the king. It was considered treason to take a woman who belonged to the king to be your wife. If you remember actually that David's son Absalom slept with David's concubines for that very reason, that it was outrageous behavior to do that. So these women, once this night with the king was over, that was it for them. It was desolation after that. That is the way this cruel empire operated. It asserted its supremacy by exploiting these young women. Today we would call it sex trafficking. It was an abuse of power to serve ungodly ends. And just in passing, it wasn't just women who were abused like this. They took seemingly 500 young men each year who became eunuchs to serve the king. So it was happening to both girls and young men. This was an empire that was obsessed with sensuality, superficiality, and supremacy. And yet it was all so very shallow. All so very shallow. So that's the first thing today. Supremacy of the empire. But then I want to look secondly at fragility of the Jews within it. We're introduced to these two people, verses 5 to 7. Let's just read them again. Verse 5, there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl, who was also known as Esther, was lovely in form and features, and Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. So the first thing we're told about them is that they are Jews. And always remember that's a religious designation, not a racial one. They belonged to the people of God, who had been exiled from Jerusalem 100 plus years before this. And in fact, that's the thing that is emphasized most about Mordecai, is that he is an exile. Now, it doesn't quite come across in our translation. Remember, you're always prone to lose something in translation. I want to read to you a literal translation of what the Hebrew in which it was originally put says. It says about exile. It says about Mordecai. He was exiled with the exiles who were exiled during Nebuchadnezzar's exile. The word is repeated 4 times. And that is always on purpose. It is to make the point that this is not Mordecai's homeland. He belongs somewhere else. And in that way, Mordecai is a picture of a Christian in this world. We are in this world, but we don't belong to it. We live here, but our home is elsewhere. It's in heaven. And just as we'll see for Mordecai and Esther, for the Christian, the world can be a hostile environment. The world can be a difficult place to live. Now, the exile had taken place 100 plus years before, so Mordecai wasn't actually in the exile. His forefathers were. But it means he was born in exile. Exile was all that he ever knew. And so there's that hint of fragility in this great supreme empire. Here are people who don't belong. A Jew. And then we're introduced to Esther, and again, the description of her suggests even greater fragility. She too is a Jew, but she's also an orphan. Her mother and father have died. She's been brought up by her cousin, Mordecai. And everything we're told about her speaks of fragility. She's a woman, powerless in the empire. She's a young woman, even more powerless in the empire. She's a Jew, she doesn't belong there. And she is an orphan. But Esther does have something going for her. We're told in verse 7, is it, that she was lovely in form and features. It means her figure and her looks. Esther was very attractive. And in Persia, that would get you places. We're also given her Hebrew name. In fact, we're given her Hebrew name first. She is Hadassah. And her Persian name is Esther. And the fact we're given both the names suggests to us that there's a hint there for us that there's going to be some tension between these two identities. Where will her loyalty lie? Will it be with God's people and with God? Or will it be with the empire? Esther will be torn between two worlds. That can be the case for you today. You're torn between two worlds. You've been brought up in the church. That's where you belong. You were baptized into the church. But the appeal of this world, its sensuality, its beauty, its glamour, its attractions, all these things draw you away. You come to church, and God, in His Word, tugs at your heart. But you go away, and there are so many different things. You're torn in different ways. We see that Esther is not just fragile in who she is, she's fragile in her faith as well. She may have belonged to the people of God, but she doesn't seem to act like it. And although, as I said, resistance was futile when she was drafted in to the king's harem, as you read on, it becomes clear that this girl seems to have everyone wrapped round her little finger. Verse 9, as soon as she arrives, we read that she pleased Haggai, the man who was in charge of all the girls, and she won his favor. Verse 9, the girl pleased him and won his favor. And then if you go down to verse 15, at the end of verse 15, we read that Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. And then go down to verse 17, and you find that after she slept with the king, top of the page 503, she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. How did that happen? Well, you might say to me, God caused these people to like her, caused her to have favor with these people, as happened to Daniel in the Persian Empire, round about the same time, or a bit earlier, I think it was. Well, yeah, that's true of Daniel. But Daniel was a different kettle of fish. Daniel nailed his colours to the mast right at the start. Daniel in the Persian Empire said, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that because I'm a Jew. And I'm not going to eat this, and I'm not going to eat that because my God wouldn't like it. And what we're actually told of Daniel, I quote, God caused the officials to show favor to Daniel. It's unequivocal. God caused them to show favor. That's not what you read about Esther. You read that she won the favor. She won their favor. This is a different story altogether. We're also told that she hid her identity, verse 10, having been advised to do so by Mordecai. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. She was under pressure from a member of her own family to keep quiet about the fact that she belonged to the people of God. And maybe you know what that's like. Maybe you've experienced that. Maybe there are unbelievers in your family and they don't want you to be open about the fact that you're a Christian. Or maybe it's not pressure from someone else. Maybe it's pressure from within. You want to keep your faith under wraps in case it prevents you advancing or getting on in life. Do you know, if Esther had revealed her identity, she would quite likely have been dropped from this competition, and she would not have ended up defiling herself with a pagan king. So we've been looking at her fragility. We're still looking at her fragility. She was fragile in who she was in the empire, but she was fragile in her faith as well, as was Mordecai, who was advising her to do this. So as we study this, it would seem that Esther's promotion to queen, it involved behavior and compromise that we cannot approve of. We can't approve of. And that has led to lots of people actually never preaching on Esther. John Calvin wouldn't go near the book because there were these issues within it. But to me, we need not approve of the path they took, even if we later applaud the good that they do. Doesn't mean that we approve of what they did to get to their position. We've got to always remember this, that the Bible doesn't always recommend what it recounts. Okay? Doesn't always recommend what it recounts. Just because something is reported does not mean it is endorsed. And you know the marvelous thing about this story? And it's the marvelous thing about the whole Bible story. That God takes compromised sinners, people who've made mistakes, people who've taken wrong turns, and he remakes them and he uses them for his glory. A past failure does not mean that you are written off by God. This is a story of hope for people who have made bad decisions in the past. Maybe you chose a career for all the wrong reasons. Maybe you got promotion in your job through inappropriate means. Maybe you married someone whom you were counseled not to marry, and now you reap the consequences. What do you do in that situation? You trust in the God who is more than able to bring good out of evil. You ask him to redeem your situation. You confess where you've gone wrong and seek his forgiveness and his restoration. You know, as we go through this book of Esther, we'll want to make heroes of Esther and Mordecai. But they would be heroes of questionable morality. The true hero of this story, and the true hero of the whole Bible, is the God who overrules all our wrong choices, and the God who chooses the weak and the fragile to overpower and overcome strength and supremacy. But let's move on quickly. What have we seen? We've seen the supremacy of the empire. We've seen the fragility of these Jews within it. I want to look briefly at vulnerability. There's a wee section at the end from verse 19 that just hints at the fact that things might not always be as they appear. A reminder that this world's supremacy can quickly be overturned. There's a plot by these two disgruntled officers of the king to take his life. We're not told why. Maybe he shortened their tea breaks or something, and they've taken the huff, and they just want rid of this king. And Mordecai hears of it. To cut a long story short, he tips off the new Queen Esther. She tells the king, ensuring she gives credit to Mordecai for the tip-off. The king's life is saved, and as was always the case in Persia, we read that the details in the last line were recorded for posterity. That always happened. They recorded everything. But there's a little oddity here as well, something unusual in the empire, that although the incident is, the foiled attempt is recorded, it's not rewarded. That's really unusual in the empire. They always rewarded people who did right. And do you know why? Why it didn't happen here? Because it wasn't the right time in God's plan. Timing is everything. You see, this intervention by Mordecai, which saved the king's life, it would be remembered and it would be rewarded at a later point when it would have the greatest impact for good. When it wouldn't just be good for Mordecai, but when it would save the entire Jewish race. We get impatient with God because he doesn't act when we want him to. God's timing is always perfect. But here's what I want to leave with you today. We've been looking, we've seen the supremacy of the empire. We've seen the fragility of the Jews within it. We've been reminded here of the vulnerability of even the greatest superpowers on earth. They can be taken down, removed at any time, if God so wills. But here's the thing. This wicked and abusive emperor, Xerxes, you might conclude he didn't deserve to be saved. And yet he was saved from death. And he owed his life to an insignificant Jew whose life-saving action went unrewarded. And today, you have the opportunity to be saved due to one who was viewed as an insignificant Jew, Jesus Christ, whose life-saving action goes unnoticed, unappreciated, and disregarded. Today we might be living our lives to the full, as if we are invincible. And yet so often we're reminded in our communities that that is not the case. That our lives can change so quickly, that our lives can end so quickly. Xerxes' life could have ended right there and then, but God provided someone to save his life. He'd have been crazy to ignore the warnings. He'd be dead if he'd done so. The Bible warns us about our vulnerability. We too would be mad to ignore the warnings, and more importantly, to ignore the one who was sent to save us, Jesus Christ. Let's pray.